Welcome, everyone, to the Success Elevated podcast. As always, I'm your host, Hayden Lee, and I am joined this week by a very special guest, another awesome person that I got to meet at the Elite Entrepreneurs event a few weeks ago, Tamara Kemper, the founder of the Process Mavens. Tamara, thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Hayden. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be, I think, a really, really cool conversation about all things small business ownership and some of the challenges that I think a lot of small business owners have. We've kind of had a similar theme the last couple of weeks. I've talked with some really awesome people from the Elite Entrepreneurs event, where we've learned a lot about how small business owners face some unique challenges that I think maybe larger companies don't realize go on when you're a small business. And I think what you offer and what you talk about a lot is going to be really helpful to our audience, which is built of a lot of small business owners. So I think the first most natural place to kind of start our conversation today is let's get our audience familiar with who you are. So if you wouldn't mind, let's dive in a little bit to your career background and kind of how you got to the place that you are today. What did you study in school? Where did you work before you founded the Process Mavens? What kind of led you to the point that you are today?
Oh, well, I started my career in small business like any person does as a theater major, but
Oh yeah,
that
that's
that
awesome.
didn't last too long. I did
I
it for a
actually
couple
did
years, but
read that online. You're a big Broadway fan.
I love, it's the whole thing. So it's
Oh,
a
that's
love.
awesome.
It's still a great love. And it's working its way back into my life, but
Oh, that's cool.
that's for another day. Um, yeah, so I graduated with my education degree. So I was an elementary school teacher for the first 7 years of my career. And um, that is there's nothing like it.
Yeah.
There's no other job career like it. I'm grateful for it. It was very, very, very challenging in a lot of ways, but I learned so much about my capacity as a leader, as an individual, like all these little people in this room and how they all take in information differently. It was a really wonderful experience. So and also I found that it was really draining for me.
Yeah.
It was really challenging for me to keep that high engaging energy for 7 hours a day, day after day after day after day. And I felt like I kind of needed a little rest.
Yeah.
And so I got into the educational technology space. So that was my first corporate experience, was working in online schools, online curriculum. And it was kind of this amazing thing to see how I could still have an impact on education and on kids, but also have a little bit more breathing space, a little more uh, balance, I think, in my day to day in that way. And what I came to learn was that I really, really loved leadership. So I loved the challenge of figuring out how to get a group of people to kind of align and figure out how to get a big, hard thing done. I loved the connection and the personal aspects of like taking this person over here and this person over here and figuring out how to put them in a place where they're going to be as successful as possible,
Yeah.
and then giving them the support and the tools and the coaching and all of that to be able to be successful, or sometimes moving them out or moving them around. That was so fun for me. And so I kind of found that like maybe the teaching kids part wasn't so much my thing, but I really loved the almost like coaching or the leadership
Yeah.
aspect business. And so, yeah, did that for a while, and then had babies, and felt like I wanted a little more flexibility in my life, and started my business. And I thought, well, if I started a business, what would it be about? And I I just loved, again, systems, processes, getting people kind of aligned and organized and getting things done. And so I started the Process Mavens. actually used to be called the process mentors, but it is the process mavens now. And we used to do taking very like manual processes and digitizing them.
Yeah.
So if somebody used like clipboards and whiteboards and all those kinds of things, we'd take them and move them into an online tool. We've transitioned a lot since then, and more of what we do now is around, just like I was saying, helping businesses really define who does what on your team, what does success look like in that role,
Yeah.
what are the responsibilities that they need to do in their role, and then what does it look like, what does success look like in those responsibilities. So it's all about clarity and alignment and having the documentation to support that. So we do documentation in a tool called Trainual, which is an online platform.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because we use Trainual here at our business. We love Trainual.
Oh,
Trainual is yeah,
fantastic.
it's an awesome, awesome tool. I saw that, as we were kind of prepping to have our conversation today, I was,
Yep,
checking out your website and looking at it. I was like, she uses Trainual. This is going to be perfect. Like we could
that's
have
right.
whole conversations about that. And I think that's a key tool that we can maybe kind of
Yep.
bring up a little bit more and talk about more in depth because it's something that we started using Trainual. Maybe it's been 6 months, I would say, maybe a little bit longer, and it has
Okay.
completely transformed how we
Oh,
do training.
I love hearing it.
We've had a really awesome training program that we've had developed, and in I guess we've had it in digital formats, but it's really just kind of been physical documents where we have this 90-day training program, and this is kind of how we onboard a new employee. This is what their first 90 days looks like. And then after that, it's kind of
Yep.
been like, have fun, go for it. And Trainuals allowed us to have continued learning, and we're going to continue to elevate our team. And what's a new process,
Yep.
or, hey, maybe this is a process we've always done and we've trained people on it, but now we've got it actually in a database somewhere so if somebody's like, I've done that before, but it was 3 months ago and I can't remember how to do it exactly. Now they can jump into Trainual and be like, oh, there's that resource. It's just Trainuals. We're big fans here at Spot On Solutions. So
I love to hear it.
we're big fans. Before
Too.
we kind of dive more into the processes and everything, I love hearing about people's career backgrounds and kind of what led them to obviously being a small business owner. But I a special place in my heart, as it should be for a lot of people, for teachers. And I love that that's a cool piece of your background. You mentioned multiple times that there was kind of these skills that you developed there that kind of helped you learn how to coach people and teach people. You were doing it maybe much younger people than you do now, but I would feel like a very similar process. Do you feel like, I'm trying to, maybe kind of figure out how to word this correctly, but how much has transferred from being an educator, I guess, how much of that knowledge that you learned doing that has transferred now to maybe teaching and coaching businesses? There's got to be some principles that you share because you're obviously very, very passionate about it. So could you maybe identify what some of those key principles are that you feel like, man, I learned how to do it for these 7 years. It was obviously the grind of the schedule and stuff. I kind of wanted to get away from that, but I still use some of those things today.
I think so. There's two things that jump out. One is kind of straightforward, but I think it's very undervalued in the business world, or maybe not undervalued, but under acknowledged. And it is the art of facilitation. So when I was a classroom teacher for 7 years and had to be in front of people every day for 7 hours for 7 years, you learn how to have presence, how to facilitate, how to keep the room with you, how to change the energy, how to watch the energy. And that is a skill set that I will say has served me extremely well.
Oh yeah.
In everything that I've done since then. And so that for me, it's like it's like this Swiss Army knife that I can pull out in just about any situation. And it was hard earned. Like
Yeah.
you do the reps, and that's what really creates that. So I would say that, because I do lead workshops and things like that. So it definitely comes in handy, because let me tell you, keeping the attention of a room full of CEOs, not always the easiest, but
No, I
they're
would
easier.
assume it at times is probably pretty similar to trying to keep the attention of some. What age group did you
It
teach?
is. I taught fifth and sixth grade.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Like people are like, oh,
yeah,
those are kids. Those are way harder to keep the attention span. I would say a bunch
yeah,
of CEOs is probably pretty similar.
yeah. It cracks me up. It's very similar. So that's the first one that I think is just an obvious one. But I think the second one, um, so the thing about teaching is you cannot get a child to pay attention or do what you need them to do, like unless they are just very intrinsically motivated and they are like there because they want to win at school, which there are some kids that that's just how they're wired, but I would say many are not.
Right.
Maybe I would say even most, certainly at the schools that I taught at, most were not. They were there for other reasons. They were there because they had to be in a lot of cases, or they were there just because, that's what you do. You have to have a relationship, and you have to feel like you are seen and you are respected and you are valued. Like those kids, if they don't think you care, if they don't think you see them and like you really see them, it is very, very difficult to get much of anything done. But when you can make a relationship, you can make a connection, you can like really see that person, not only do you get their goodwill and their, at least they will try, right? Like they will do their best to try to show up for you because there's a relationship there. But more than that, because you know them and you have that relationship, in the same way that I was sharing, like you can put the right team member in the right seat because you get them and you
Yep.
get what lights them up, you can provide the lessons and the information in a way that they can see, that they can digest. But you have to get to know people and you have to see what's special about them and what's different about them. And so that, to me, that's just like humans, but for some reason we think kids are different than adults, but they're not. We all just are humans who are weird
Yeah.
and who have weird things about us that we like, or that like our brain attunes to, and we just want to be seen, and we just want someone to be present with us and to care about us. And that, to me, that's another thing that like that has served me well. I really try my best and have, with my leadership positions and with clients, to just see the person as the unique individual they are, that they have something that is different about them, and to really love them for who they are. And that just allows whatever needs to happen so much easier.
Yeah. Oh,
So
yeah.
much easier.
Well, and to your point, we've been recently doing some leadership training here internally with our team, and as preparation for that training, we read a book, and I'm pretty confident this is the right title, but I think it's called Leadership and Self Deception, and that book talks
I don't know
about
that one.
it's a good one. It talks about getting outside of the box a little bit, and the box is we've got to we've got to stop treating people like numbers or things on a spreadsheet, right? Like you've got to start treating people like people, and if you treat your employees and your teammates like people, because they are people, they're not a tool, they're not a piece of equipment. You start treating them like a person, you're going to be much more successful in helping motivate them, helping figure out what makes them tick, getting them into the right seat on the bus, right? A lot of people use that analogy, and that's the best way I've heard to talk about it, because you know, people talk about that analogy a lot, but they don't put it into practice. I've worked at some different corporate type environments where they talk about those things, but they don't really put it into practice. If you get hired for a role and you struggle with that role, you're gone. See you later, right?
Yeah.
And one of the coolest things about working where I work now is I've firsthand seen people that have maybe struggled in a role that have gotten moved because our leadership team cares about them as a person. they've gotten moved to another role and they've just excelled. They've just turned into the best employee, the best, hardest worker here. And it's just amazing to see the development when you stop treating people like numbers or like a thing, a number on a spreadsheet or a piece of equipment or a tool, and you start treating them as people. And man, they struggled a little bit here, but maybe let's try and get them in a different seat on the bus. We hired them because we feel like they fit on our bus. We've just got to get them on the right seat. And I think it totally aligns with what you're talking about with teaching kids, but also teaching CEOs and business. Like nobody's going to engage with you. You're not going to be able to really help that person, that child, that CEO, whoever, if they don't feel like they're being respected, their needs are being met, that their voice is being heard. Like they're not going to try and get better if they don't feel like that's being reciprocated in some way. And so I love that concept. And it's cool that you learn that from really a couple different, like you learn that in two very different aspects, right? Like you've now own a small business where you coach, but like being an educator is almost like business exempt. There's obviously money involved and you've got to worry about like budgets and how do you pay for supplies and everything. But for the most part, like being an educator is almost exempt from being a part of a business in a weird way. But it allows you learned like similar concepts across both different avenues, which is just, it's really, really cool.
Yeah, I think it is, when you were talking, the thing that I want to say, and maybe this is a controversial thing I'm about to say, but oh well, we'll just do it anyway.
Go for it.
I am currently starting to go on a hypothesis that there are some small business founders who, due to how they're wired, it is very challenging for them to do this. So what you're talking about, this idea of really getting curious about people and wanting to see what their unique talents are, and then making sure that they get put in the right seat and get supported to grow up in that role. Like to you and I, perhaps the way that we're wired, that seems very logical. And that seems, I wouldn't say simple, but like I get how to do that. I know how to do that. And certainly my experience as a teacher helped to grow that capacity. But I also think there's just a way that I am that I see that. Like that's what I'm attuned to. It's what I care about. And so it's what my laser focus goes to. And I think that there are a lot of really good-hearted, good humans who are founders of companies who are not attuned to that because it's not their natural wiring. They are attuned to something else, probably going really fast, getting a lot of things done, thinking very big and strategically. And to do that is very challenging. And so what I'm seeing is that gap is a real challenge in small business. Because in a larger company, you can put a very talented COO or, director of operations in who has that talent for seeing everybody's unique kind of special recipe for what they're going to be able to do.
Right.
And who nurtures that, who cares about that, and who's already attuned to that, can put them in that seat. But you may not have that in a very small business. You just have this founder who's like super excited about going fast, probably really wicked smart, talented at what they do, but then you have this group of people that maybe are getting a little bit left behind in terms of getting their needs met from being in the right place. And so I think this is a challenge, and I think it's a matter of somehow, whether that's through like a fractional COO or having a good coach or consultant to like help you evaluate your team and be able to see what you can't see. Like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the fact that CEO doesn't have that talent. I think in fact, it's actually really good because it allows them to go be really good at the things they're good at. Whereas if you were really super focused on the people all the time, that might slow you down. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm still working on this hypothesis that I just,
no. That's a great hypothesis. And I think the crucial piece to it that I think helps make the difference is just what you were saying there at the end, is that the CEO has to be self-aware enough that, he or she can be like,
Yes.
hey, I struggle with this thing. I'm maybe not as
Right.
good with people, or I maybe don't look at people's needs as well as I should. So let me go hire somebody else to really worry about that. And then I can worry about big picture, be very task oriented
Yep.
or whatever it is. And I can just continue to fly in my lane, but I can have somebody else be like, okay, hey, that's great that you're talking about that, but we've got to be concerned with employees. And maybe it's it's a fractional COO, it's a director of HR. I don't know what that role necessarily looks
Yeah.
like, but I think
There's a lot of ways.
it requires a CEO to develop this. They don't necessarily have to develop the skill of being super people oriented, but they do need to be humble enough and introspective enough to be like, hey, I'm not good at this, I got to go get somebody that is. And I think that's the piece to it, right? You're not suggesting, and I'm not suggesting, definitely, is that people have to be able to wear all of these hats. You don't have to be good at all of this stuff, but you've got to be willing to be like, okay,
No.
I'm not, you recognize that I'm not good at it, I'm going to go find somebody that is. And I think that's a great hypothesis. And I think you're 100% dead on with it, because the only way it's really going to happen is if you start looking, outside of yourself a little bit. So I love that. And I think it leads perfectly into, I want to play devil's advocate a little bit, Tamara. So you obviously focus a lot on how can we help businesses become more efficient? How do we help them develop some processes, whether it's through Trainual or whatever, to help them be maybe more efficient, or to more effectively hit their goals, whatever it is. A small business, and maybe the answer is just what we just talked about, but how do you balance being efficient and having your employees working really hard and knocking out all of their tasks and everything? How do you balance that with also having like a positive work environment for your employees? Like, you want people to be efficient and work hard and get their job done, but you don't want it to be such a terrible environment that they hate coming to work, and you're going to have high turnover if you do that. Have you found a way to balance those two, or you might have to develop another hypothesis here, but I don't know. Is that like, how do you balance those two things?
So many. So the work that we do, the most important aspect for me in what we do is getting really, really clear about what success looks like in each role. So if I'm coming into a new position and I know that to win in my role, I need to, let's say I'm like a client success person for a service-based company. And if I'm coming into that role and I know that the way that I win is I get 90% client retention, and I get a 9 on my NPS score for customer satisfaction, and I know that all of my client documentation and templates are accurate and up to date at all times. Like, I'm just making this up, but let's say those are the 3 things that my company says I need to accomplish in my role to win. I did turn my ringer off there with an alarm on.
You're good.
Sorry about that. So if I have clarity of what it looks like to win in my role, then I have so much information to now be able to almost act as an artist in my role, because the goal is to get to the finish line. I do that, and the methods that I use to do that, now I can start to be a little creative. Now I can start to try things and be innovative and have a little bit more of that entrepreneurial mindset, because I know what I need to do to get to my finish line. The other piece so I know where I'm going, I know where the finish line is. I also need boundaries. So how far, like, I can go like this, but what are my boundaries? What are the structures or the standards by which I need to do my work. So are there specific standards for each of the processes that I need to do? Like, don't do it this way. Make sure you always have a cover letter on your TPS report, like whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then the core values, I think of as a boundary. So the core values is like this, you don't ever go outside of our core values in how you're moving. So as long as you're staying within our core values, as long as the minimum standards are met, and as long as you get to that finish line, you be an artist in your role, have fun, come up with better ways to do it, innovate. We don't want you to be a robot, a machine, any of that. We need you to solve this specific problem and also keep our culture growing and happy and thriving. And so I think if we can get really specific, like ridiculously specific about those three things, everybody can have a really good time at work because we all know what we're here to do.
The Success Elevated podcast is brought to you by SOS Navigator. SOS Navigator is an on-demand training platform geared towards marketing, personal development, and business growth. We understand that as a business owner in the service industry, you wear a million hats. Let SOS Navigator be a simple and cost-effective way for you to continue to grow your business. Click the link in the show notes below and use code SOS Podcast to get 10% off your next on-demand training course.
I feel like that question of like, how do you balance that? I think you can get really caught up in, well, we have pizza parties and we, you know what I mean? Like we treat our employees really
fun too.
Yeah, those are fine. Those are fine. I'm not saying don't do that, but like, I think that's what people lean on is like, well, we have a great work environment. I buy my employees drinks every day. And it's like, okay, that's cool. But like, what does the actual work entail? And I think that's a great problem, or sorry, a great solve to the problem, what you just presented, which is like, let's just get really clear on what your job title is and what your role is, right? Like, because I think that will then better, when you hire somebody, they know, okay, I am being hired to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to get paid this to do those things. And then from there, I've got the flexibility to kind of accomplish it however I need to accomplish those things. And, you know, what we do at Spot On Solutions is we market and help do marketing, digital marketing for service-based companies, specifically home services. So we're talking like restoration, plumbing, HVAC, like those types of things. And a lot of the clients that we work with are smaller businesses, a couple $1 million of revenue a year, and they're doing it with 10 employees, right? Or 15 employees. And they're small enough that I feel like that's a challenge for a lot of them is they have a really young workforce. A lot of their technicians are right out of high school. They're, 18 to 21 or 18 to 24, somewhere in that ballpark. And a lot of times they hire on these technicians and they don't clearly explain to them what is expected of them or what their job role is. And so they get high turnover. They if they're keeping an employee longer than a year or two, that's amazing, right? Whereas a lot of other companies, they're holding on to employees for 5, 6, 7 years. And so the turnover is really, really high. And I think that's a huge problem is they don't clearly have their job descriptions outlined. And I think that's a simple, it's probably not as simple as I'm making it feel, but it's a simple enough process that you can sit down with somebody like you or whoever and be like, okay, let's clearly define what everybody's role is. What are they supposed to be accomplishing day to day? What's the goal? And if you can do those things, like, gosh, your work environment's going to be so much more successful. You're going to be efficient, but you're also going to have happy employees because they're not being asked to do things that they didn't think they had to do, so.
That's right. They came in from day one with clear expectations of exactly what it looks like to be effective in their job. So there's no surprises. I find that so many business owners, they think they've been clear. They would swear they have explicitly been clear about what they wanted, but there's so much assumption, and every single person is coming with a different set of life experiences and simply does not share your point of view. Even if you think your point of view is the right one, it doesn't matter because that person coming in has led a completely different life.
Yep.
And it is rational how they're behaving. So if you want them to behave differently, even if it seems absurd, you need to kind of paint the picture for them of what it looks like, for a service-based, a home service company, that might be really walking through like, okay, well, let's say your core value is like caring or something. One of them is caring. Well, what does it look like for a technician to show care when they are on at a home? That might look like I don't have any stains on my shirt. It might look like I put on little booties over my
Oh,
shoes
that's
every
amazing.
time.
Yes, yes,
And
totally.
so we want to codify with ridiculous precision what it looks like. And I'm not saying to be pedantic. I'm saying to be clear that they have a picture of what's in your head, because you as the founder, if you could do it, you have a very specific way you would do it, but you can't like project that into their brains. So you have to first get it out of your brain, write it down or make a video or like make a thing, and then make sure that person is willing to do that, because they may not be. They may not value having a clean shirt and putting the booties on and having a smile. We just did a really big training program with a restoration company, and one of their things was around kind of like looking like you are moving with intention, moving with purpose. And so I was like asking, like, well, what does that mean? You know what that means, but like, tell me what that means. And I had them, we did videos of showing what does it not look like to do it? And what does it look like to do it? And we talked about like, how do we want to explain this? And it's that vibe, right? Of when you walk onto a job site and people are going like this and like not smiling, you get like feeling a little intimidated. And so we have to say those things out loud. It's so silly, but it's not. Because if you don't know that that's how you're being perceived, you don't know. Tina, you can tell you're getting me all wound up, because this is the kind of stuff that I'm like.
Well, that's why I got so excited when it's why I got so excited when you brought this up, is because it's 100% accurate. And I love the concept. It was something that I hadn't thought of before, but values, company values are a big thing that everybody talks about. Oh, we, it's Spot On Solutions. Like, we believe in big things. We live teamwork and collaboration. We do all of these. We have these values laid out. And then, a lot of companies do this, but then they don't clearly define, okay, how do you live these values? We want you to live these values as an employee here at Spot On Solutions or the Process Mavens or wherever the business is. We have these values that we want you to live as an employee. But if you don't clearly define what it means to actually live those values, you're going to have employees that are going to be like, well, I thought I was being caring when I showed up to that home of that customer, but apparently I wasn't, because you gave me a bad review, or the customer gave me a bad review, or maybe the lead technician that was there with me gave me a bad peer review. Something happened where I was like, I thought I was being caring. And it's like, well, you weren't, because we didn't clearly define to you what it means to be caring. It means, let's have a clean shirt. Let's put the booties on. Let's look the customer in the eye and shake their hand. Like little things like that can just make all the difference. And so, like, you've got your every company, I'm sure at some point, depending on how small they are, is going to be like, yes, our values are these 5 things. And then they just expect people to know, okay, but how do I live those 5 values? And I think something as simple as just be like, okay, here's how you live the values. You do these things every day. When you go to a customer's home, you do these things. When you speak with other employees, you do these things. Like, that's how you live the values. And if you can, in an ideal world, we all wouldn't have to just live it as a checklist where like, oh yeah, I checked all those things off. But for some people, it's best if you say, okay, here's a checklist or a list of ways that you can live these values. And if you do those things every day, you're going to be successful either here at my company or in the future. And I love the concept of, okay, you got your values. Let's define how you actually live those values. That's a perfect piece of advice for small business owners. I love that.
And by role, right? Because in every role, those values are going to translate differently. A technician in the home is going to be different from the accounting or the bookkeeper. And how they're representing your business. And so articulating that, getting at, because half the things that we as business owners are annoyed about, like, oh, I can't believe it. Like, you just have, I always explain it as like, there's a sense of non-specific frustration. Like, it's just like, that guy just bugs me. He just bugs me. Well, if I asked you 5 or 6 questions, we could get to the root of what value he is violating? It always comes back to that. So when there's that subtle kind of undercurrent of just annoyance, there's a value that's being violated that you're not clear of which one it is. So it always can show up. So what one's he violating? And so how can we then take that value and give that person some feedback specific to the value? So it's not about like a personal thing. It's, hey, this is our value. Our value is we care. And, one of the ways that we show we care is by greeting customers, by looking them in the eye and shaking their hand and showing that smile. And, we just see you every time you're with people, you're just kind of looking slumped over and you don't smile when you're with customers. And is that something that you're willing to change? And you can leave that as a question, because they may not be willing. Oh, well, that's not how I am. Okay, well, that's not going to work for us. That's not going to work for a company. But then that person has a choice to make that decision.
Well, and if you have these clearly defined, if you have these values and how those values fit into each role, if you have all of that clearly defined and laid out, you're going to hire better people. To your point, right? In theory, you should be able to catch this before you even hire that person, because everybody's always so frustrated.
That's right.
I hired this person. I spent 6 months training him and they were a terrible employee. So I had to fire him, and I wasted all that time and money getting them, pushed through our training process, and it didn't work. Right. It's like, well, you probably could have solved that from the beginning if you clearly had their role and responsibility outlined and how they can live the values on a day-to-day basis. If you'd had all that outlined, I bet maybe you would have identified, oh, this person isn't going to be a good fit for us. You could have done that from the beginning and saved yourself the time and the headache of having that quote unquote bad employee at your place of work. You can solve all those problems if you have it laid out beforehand, and you can, solve that issue in the hiring process. And I think that's the perfect way to do it. I think this is all kind of leading, Tamara, if you don't mind, I think this is all kind of leading into a piece of the conversation I want to make sure we hit at before we run out of time today. But it's this training piece. And you mentioned Trainual at the beginning. It's a tool that we use. It's a tool that you use when you're coaching companies. Training is, we had a meeting a few months ago with our director of HR. We were talking a lot about the rollout of our Trainual program and what we're going to be using Trainual for and all this. And our director of HR mentioned, he's like, does anybody know why he was quoting some survey, but he said, does anybody know why an employee would leave a company within their first year of work? And everyone, threw out some different ideas. Somebody mentioned, oh, well, they're not getting paid enough. And it's usually actually has nothing to do with their wage, because they signed on, they knew what their wage was before they committed to the role. He said 90% of the time it's because they don't feel like they're being trained well. They don't feel like there's any kind of good training resources for them, and that they weren't trained well enough to do their job. And so they feel like they're failing, or their supervisors feel like they're failing. And it all comes back to this training piece, right? And so talk a little bit about training. Why do you feel like Trainual and that tool is so important for companies? And why do you feel like training would be something that a company really needs to focus on elevating?
Oh, so many things. Okay. So I think what I want to say first is that I don't know how that survey was phrased.
Yeah.
Or how, I don't know.
And there's a million surveys out there, right? So that's probably not truly 90%. Who knows? Yeah.
Whatever it was. But I would be willing to bet good money that if that employee had been provided with clear expectations, standards, and values, that would have solved for the problem that they are calling training. Because here's the thing. A lot of times what we call training is actually a brain dump of information that we think is helpful. And so our poor friends who come join us at our company usually take one of two paths. One is we have nothing and you're just going to sit by Barb for 2 weeks and, hope for the best.
Yep.
Peace be with you. Or here are the 47 documents, or even the 20,000 subject trainual of every single thing I ever wanted to tell you about your role. Go through it all. Godspeed. So
Yeah.
so you like a lot of times it's one of those two, and I honestly am not convinced that the latter is better.
Right.
Like sometimes sitting by Barb for 2 weeks is going to be way more relevant because you're actually going to see the day-to-day action. So when I think about training, I think about kind of a middle way, which is you need to be crystal clear. So if I'm a new employee and I'm coming into my role, I need to be crystal clear on what my role is, how it fits into the larger organization and the mission, and how I win in my role. That is my most important thing I need to understand. Thing number two, I need to understand who all of the other people are and the other roles in my business, because I need to understand how I work with all the people on my team and how we fit together. So that alone is like magic.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, we sort of skip it. From there, I actually have a 1-page training that I hand out a lot of times when I do workshops, and people laugh because, you know, we set up Trainual that's part of our main services, is we help businesses set up Trainual, which is way more than 1 page. But I show them this 1 page because it really is, it shows that the most important thing is giving people clarity of what success looks like. And all it has on it is, what does success look like in this role? What are all the tasks that this person needs to be able to do? Who are all the people that this person needs to meet? And I can't remember what the other thing on it is, a company mission. But the idea is, if you can give people a clear idea of what they do, they can then kind of work through uncovering the how-tos for each of the pieces. But you need to give them a picture of what done looks like. And that's what I think training can do really, really well. So I can say, all right, John, you're coming into your role. Here are your 10 main responsibilities. It's writing up invoices and conducting sales calls and whatever it is. I have instruction for how to do those 10 main things, but everything else is just around you understanding how you win and what success looks like in your role. And so, yeah, we can really create a ton of information. And I think those things can be really organically created, like through professional development, through ongoing weekly conversations. But I think, again, like, I just want to emphasize how critical it is to give new employees clarity of success. So both in their overall role, as well as in each of the core responsibilities. How do I successfully write an invoice? How do I successfully conduct a sales call? So we just need to be clear of what success looks like.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. The training doesn't matter. Again, going back to what you're saying, like, the training doesn't matter if we don't clearly have it defined for them what they're being trained on, or what they're being trained to do. Like, I've been trained several different ways at the different, jobs that I've had throughout my life. I've definitely sat with a Barb for 2 weeks and just been like, I hope I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing, because I'm just kind of trying to copy what she's doing or he's doing or whatever, right? Like, I'm just, they didn't really tell me what my job role is, but I guess I'm just supposed to follow this person around for a little while, and hopefully I can just copy and paste what they're doing. But maybe what they're doing isn't correct, right? So you never know. And then I've also had it be, it wasn't Trainual, but it was a giant 3-ring binder with, 1,000 pages of just be like, okay, read this binder, and that's what you're doing for the next 2 weeks, and then hope you know what you're supposed to do. And it's like, what the heck? Like, there was
miserable.
Oh, it's miserable. And so I think you're right. Like, the biggest key piece to this is clearly define your role. How do you have success? How do you win? And then we can provide you resources through a tool of some kind, Trainual or whatever, or meeting with, or developing a 90-day program, whatever it is. We're going to build you a training process that helps you win, or provide you the resources to help you win once the winning goal has been defined. Once you have an idea of what your job description is. Yeah, go ahead.
I remember what the other thing was on my 1-page thing, which is relevant to what you just said, which is it was a 30-day, a 60-day, and a 90-day.
Perfect.
So by 30 days, you should be able to write an invoice and conduct a sales call. By 60 days, you should be able to, I don't know what, do what, this, and this, so that you also understand like, okay, here's how I need to prioritize my learning. So I say all of this to just say like simplicity is king when you're thinking about creating training for your team. Come up with the clarity that they need so that they can focus their attention on the right things, and then build the content. Only give them what's relevant to the pieces that they need to do their job. Don't try to throw in the kitchen sink and tell them everything about your industry. And like, it's so overwhelming to try to learn all that. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't provide like links to resources. And that's the nice thing about Trainual is you can provide like reference materials. You can provide, so for the person that really is curious and wants to like deepen their knowledge, you can still provide that, but that's not a required part of that initial onboarding where there's just drinking from the fire hose and trying to take on so much information at once.
Yep. The fire hose analogy, we throw that out around a lot.
It's a lot.
There's just a lot. There's a lot to learn. Right. And so if we can find a way to maybe make that fire hose drinking a little bit more manageable in some way, shape, or form, and defining roles, Trainual tools, resource, whatever it is, but make that fire hose drinking, that overwhelming amount of information that a new employee is going to get in their first 30, 60, 90 days. If we can find a way to simplify that and make it really easy for them to understand, okay, I love what you're saying there with the milestones where it's like, okay, the first 30 days, you've got to be able to accomplish this thing, so that they're not like, okay, eventually my role is going to include 10 things, but the first 30 days, I'm really going to focus on these 3, right? So, okay, I can know how to do these first 3 in these first 30 days. And then in 60 days, okay, I'm going to do the next 3 and really learn how to do those. And then by 90 days, I've learned how to do all 10 of my major responsibilities, and I'm off to the races. I love the milestone concept because, again, I think, and just relating it back to our audience, I think so much of our audience is just like, yep, go follow around Bob or Barb or whoever, go follow them around for a couple of weeks and good luck. And you're like, okay, but how do I win? And how do I get like, yeah, that's important. Shadowing is important. And it's cool to learn how somebody actually applies what they're learning. But like, I got to have more help than that. Sorry, go ahead.
It's kind of cool is you could, so like, let's say you are squarely in the Barb place, like you're in the following around Barb place in your training development journey, and that's just real for you. And you don't have time to like build out a whole thing right now. Make a checklist of, here are the 15 things you need to watch Barb do.
Yep.
And then another checklist that says, okay, now make sure Barb signs off that she's seen you do all 15 of these things.
That's great.
And that's like an amazing, like that could take you what, tops an hour to put that together if you kind of like got feedback from the rest of the team. But at least, so yeah, we're going to put you with Barb, and yeah, we don't really have like a training program, but like Barb's our best person. So we want her to show you, and here's the 15 things we want you to watch. So if you don't see her do that, make sure you ask her to show you that.
Yep.
And then at the end of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, you should be able to have her sign off on all 15 of these things that you can do them as well. And that's kind of like a nice little hack way to get to a first version.
It's a perfect hack way. Yeah. Because so many of the people that I'm sure you talk to and that we talk to on a day-to-day basis, we tell them training is important. We've had multiple podcasts talking about how important training is, but at the end of the day, a lot of these businesses are so small that the owner, the founder, is still actually doing a lot of the operational work, which is a whole other podcast. We need to be like, you got to get out of the day-to-day operations, but they're small enough that they're like an owner operator. And so I'm sure they're like, we don't have the time to hire somebody just to build a training program, or we don't have the revenue generated right now to hire somebody to do that. That's a perfect little hack way to just be like, hey, okay, maybe you're not ready for it right now. You can talk to somebody like the Process Mavens down the road. But for right now, if you don't want to have high turnover, here's a little hack. And I love that way that just, hey, watch Barb, make sure she teaches you how to do these things. Make sure she signs off that you can do these things. And then when you're done in your training, you're shadowing for the next couple of weeks. You're going to feel like you can at least accomplish those 10 or 15 things that Barb showed you how to do. And I that's perfect little hack.
And there's care
I love
too,
learning
right?
hacks.
Like you're showing care and preparation. Like,
Yep.
yeah, we don't have a training program, but we didn't want to just throw you to the wolves. We actually took some time to create a plan. It's not a perfect plan, but people who are getting into small business already know, like if they're coming to work for your small business, they already know that you're not perfect. Like, well, nobody nobody, no business is perfect.
Yeah,
Everyone's
big
making it up.
secret. Yeah,
I don't
no
know
matter
if
what
you knew
size
that.
they are.
Big secret. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all just making it up. But yeah, it's a nice way to do it. And then the cool thing is once you've got that list, then Barb can start recording videos of how she does each of those, start putting those into a tool like Trainual. And now Barb never has to tell another person how to do it.
Yeah. She doesn't have to
You
spend
can
her
just
time.
watch them in
Yeah.
Trainual, build a couple quizzes, and now you've got a great training program. You can still evaluate that person can do it in the real world, but you've got all the instruction and the best practices for how to do those things from the very best person who does them, which is a great way to
Awesome.
kind of
They're still shadowing Barb, but just virtually.
That's right.
They're still
by scale without making Barb crazy.
Yep. That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
This conversation has been amazing, Tamara, and I feel like we've covered so many cool pieces to this, talking about the training and how do you elevate your employees, how do you help them have success and develop these processes that will help them do it. There's so many things here that we could spend a lot more time on, so I want to make sure our audience knows we're going to have you back on in the future to talk more in depth about a lot of these things. But I want to give you some time here at the end to kind of talk about where can people find you guys at the Process Mavens? How can people get in touch with you? What do they need to do to start maybe getting some training resources? Maybe they're big enough and they're ready that they need some help from somebody outside of just their team. How can they get in contact with you?
Sure. Well, the best place is theprocessmavens.com. And there you'll find out all about us, and there's a contact form, but there's also a link on our website to a group course that we have, a cohort-based course that we're running. We're doing our first one in December, and then we plan to run it monthly. And that is for defining your roles and responsibilities. So if you're not quite ready to have, to hire for one-on-one services, but you kind of want to start working through this, that's a good option as well. But we're also on LinkedIn as well. You'll find me, Tamara Kemper, on LinkedIn, and those are some places where we are.
That's amazing. For those that are listening, if you enjoyed this podcast like I enjoyed this podcast, talking with Tamara, you got to reach out to her, because I think what we touched today is just the surface. We just kind of scratched the surface with your knowledge and the concepts that you're talking about. You gave us some great little hacks and tips of how to do this. If you really want to maybe take your team to the next level, maybe above just a little hack, you got to reach out to Tamara. And so anyways, this was fantastic. Thank you again for all the resources and the insights that you shared. I want to close the podcast, if you don't mind, with asking the same 3 questions we ask all of our guests. We've had some awesome answers to these, and I know your answers are going to be fantastic as well. So I want to make sure we ask them. First things first, favorite book or podcast that you've read recently or listened to recently, that you'd like to recommend?
Well, after being recommended about 10 times, I finally cracked open Rick Rubin's The Creative Act. So that's the one I'm in the middle of, and it's
Love it.
really, really wonderful.
That's a great recommendation.
Yeah,
I've had same with you. I've had several other people recommend that book to me. So I've got to just crack it open.
Just do it. Just do it. The chapters are like 2 pages long, so you could just read a chapter and then be done.
Oh, that's
take
awesome.
a little break for the day.
Okay. Love it. Second question. You wear a lot of hats, obviously. I mean, we talked about your career. We talked about, I'm sure you mentioned you had some babies. So you've got maybe some kids running around, right? So you wear a lot of hats. You own a small business. You've got so much going on. How do you relax at the end of a long day? How do you recharge the batteries? Or I want to maybe change this question, because I've had a lot of guests that have offered, maybe it's how they start their day or taking a break in the middle of the day. How do you, I guess, manage a long day of a lot of stress? What are you doing to kind of, recharge your emotional batteries?
Wow. I feel like I I will not go into great detail here, but I would say for me, just meditation, present, just really focusing on presence and being in this present moment. It kind of makes everything else melt away. So the more you do it, the easier it gets.
You know, I used to not be a big believer. Okay. And follow me along here, because I'm fully a believer now. I just do it a little bit different. But I used to be like, oh, meditation, what kind of hokey, weird stuff is that, right? But I've since learned, we've had some trainings on like EQ, emotional intelligence, and all this stuff, that like meditation really is just practicing like mindfulness, like taking the time every day to, if it's sit and meditate and just focus your body on relaxing and meditating in that way, that's great. But you can also do it elsewhere by doing things that require all of your focus, and let the stresses of work and the world kind of melt away and focus on a particular task. So like I've found ways to meditate in like woodworking, and like I like fly fish, like things like that help me, like I'm going to shut the world off and focus on this one particular thing. And it's helped me practice like mindfulness and meditation. And I think I'm much more a believer now than I used to be. And I think it's a super, super important piece of, and it should be an important piece of everybody's day. So I love it.
Well, I think the trick is shifting it from a should, actually. So
yeah,
I think all of my resistance to meditation, and I did the same, like I would do it, but it was a task, it was a chore. And so I was thinking of it as like, this is a habit that's going to make me better. So I should do it because I know it's good for me. And when I stopped doing that, and I just started being curious about the present moment and just being here in your fly fishing, right? Like you're just there and you're curious about what's happening and you're paying attention. Like you can do that anywhere.
Yeah.
And it makes every moment more interesting.
Yeah. I love it. Last question, Tamara. And feel free to take this kind of any direction you'd like, but if you could rewind to the beginning of your career, whether it's the beginning of your career with the Process Mavens or your career in education, whatever you want to do. But if you could rewind to the beginning and tell younger Tamara one thing, what would that one thing be?
Trust your intuition.
Done. That's a great way to close out this podcast. Trust your intuition. Tamara, thank you. Thank you so much for your insights today. This was an awesome podcast. I know our audience is going to get a lot of really awesome value out of it. And again, I just really, really appreciate it. And we are going to have you back on again to talk a little bit more in detail about some of these things that we mentioned today. But again, just thank you so much.
I'd love to. Thank you, Hayden. This was really fun.
This has been Success Elevated, making you a little bit better one show at a time. Thanks for joining us. Please subscribe on YouTube or any other major podcast platform to listen to more episodes. We are proudly brought to you by Spot On Solutions. If you'd like to learn more about how we can help you grow your business, please check us out at spotonsolutions.com.